It was around Thanksgiving when my grandparents came to visit. It had been almost 2 years since I and my younger brother and sister, Eric and Brenna, got to see them. There always seemed to they always seemed so lively when they came around. For an old man, my grandpa had a very interesting hobby. He collected action figures, any sorts of them. He had collections of He-Man figurines, to Power Rangers, to Thundercats. But the best part about them was coming to town was that every time my grandpa came, he always brought a small collection for us to play with. Never to keep, but it was always fun playing with some of his favorite toys with him. As our grandparents entered our home to stay for the weekend, my mother greeted them with a smile. She always had at least a grin on her face. She was one of the most ecstatic people that I've ever seen. She always seemed to bring light to a dark day, not just to me and my siblings, but to everyone, it seems. But for some reason, my grandfather never came through the door, and my grandpa walked in with a blank look in his eyes. They looked dead to me, which is the complete opposite of what they usually generated. He didn't even say hello. He just walked in with a bag in his hand. My mother asked him, "Where's Mom?" That of which my grandpa replied with, "She went away for a while." This puzzled my mother. I couldn't see it in her facial expressions. She tried to bring up more on the subject, but Grandpa quickly dismissed it, as if it were no deal and to stop talking about it. So she did, thinking they must have been going through some troubles that he would rather not discuss, just as my mother and my father had. Grandpa looked over at Brenna, who was currently taking a nap on the couch, and gave it an almost sinister smirk, one that I've never seen on his face in my entire life. "Isn't it fascinating how easy it is to watch someone sleep?" he said. He and my mom moved into the kitchen where I finally gave my greetings. "Hi, Grandpa. How have you been?" He replied with a quizzical stare. What was wrong with my grandfather? Why was he not so jumpy and delightful as his previous visits? I dismissed the abstract, silent reply and moved into the next subject. "What's in the bag?" Again he looked at me with that same stare, but this time spoke. "Just some figurines I found." He dumped out the bag, which was much more empty than usual. Instead of 10 or 12 action figurines he usually brought, what fell from the bag were two very old, very creepy, tiny action figures. I quickly picked them up and looked at them. At first glance, they looked like regular old action figures, but the odd thing was, I've never seen them in my life. No cartoon I've ever seen or anything ever had these characters. I looked like an old man, his face riddled with dirt and grime. He was wielding what looked like a short dagger. He was also in a loincloth robes. The other one also had the face of an old man, but he was wielding a hatchet. His face was also covered in dirt. He also had no clothes to accommodate for his figurine body. He looked like one of my sister's Ken dolls that she lost all of the clothes to. They were the two creepiest dolls that I've ever seen, but on the other hand, as I held them, I began to enjoy them. I had an inexplainable urge to put them in my pocket and keep them. I looked up at my grandfather, ready to ask him where he got them, but when I was about to open my mouth, I noticed his expression changed again. He looked as if he was in a silent rage, staring at the dolls, and then almost instantaneously at me. There was a fire in his dead eyes as he spoke. "Give them to me, now, now!" I looked at him, startled, but then he had tried lunging at me for the two figurines. Being as scared as I was from the incident, shot backwards to avoid his advance towards me. My grandfather's knees must have faltered in his attempt to grab the two figurines because quickly he fell to the ground. My mother quickly reached down and tried to pick him up, but then he was clutching his heart and grasping for air in a rather terrifying way. My mother called 911, but he was dead before the ambulance could arrive from his heart attack. And the next week, my grandfather's funeral had taken place. We had no way to contact my grandmother. We had no idea where she could be, so the funeral went on without her. But even whilst all of these sad events were taking place, my obsession for these two figurines began to grow rapidly. Not so much the old man with the hatchet, as much as the man with the dagger. My brother Eric had subsequently taken a great liking to the man with the hatchet, so I gave it to him. It seemed like no matter where we went, we always had our figurines with us. And my experience with the dagger-wielding old man, it gave me a short spark in my soul. There's really no other way to describe it. It kept me erratic and happy in a weird sense. In the next coming months, though, things had changed. I began to resent the old figurine. It stared at me in the most menacing way, and for some reason made it unable for me to sleep. I knew I should get rid of the doll, but I can't. I tried many times, but I always seemed to pick it back up. I could never be rid of it. Not to mention the fact that it was giving me nightmares, and not normal nightmares either. Ones where people are watching me sleep and try to murder me. But the other way around, I would have dreams of myself being in my brother's or mother's room with a dagger, just as the old man figurine has, and just watching them sleep. Always in the shadow of the corners, never getting too close. Not a nightmare that you'd realize that you imagined so many different events in a small amount of time. It wasn't that way at all. I would stand there for hours, just watch them sleep, and do nothing. Just watch. These nightmares scared me, but there was nothing that I could do. My brother was just as silent and lifeless anymore as I was, and we both began to grow apart from our mother and sister. So silence was our only option, and for now, it all had been suffocating. One night I woke up startled. When I looked around my room to see nothing was there, but I felt a cold wetness in my sheets. I reached down to feel the wet area. It seemed I had wet the bed. Oh, great. How am I going to explain this one to my mother? I got up and immediately looked for my figurine. I've gotten to the point where I go nowhere without it, but I couldn't find it. It pained me to go anywhere without my seemingly life companion. But I decided just to go head to my mother's room. I stepped through her silently cracked door and walked to her bed, and I nudged her, trying to wake her up to tell her the embarrassing thing I've done. It was 3 a.m. and very dark in her bedroom with no windows. I tried nudging her again, but something was wrong. She was also wet. I turned on the small lamp on her nightstand and stood there awestruck. There, lying in the bed, was the cold, lifeless, blood-soaked body of my murdered mother. I looked at myself. I was covered in blood, and my mother looked as though she had been carved, like someone had been trying to cut pieces out of her. And there, sitting in her neck, was a dagger. I grabbed it and pulled it out of her neck. Its blood-soaked blade shined in the dim light of the lamp, and I just stood there, terrified. Most people scream when they're scared, but I passed that point. I couldn't even muster a sound out of my throat. I froze, scared to even turn around. I glanced around my dead mother. Sitting there on the top of the covers was my figurine, dagger in hand, laying there like my mother was holding it. Before she fell asleep. Out of instinct, I quickly grabbed it. Once I did, I felt its spark come into me again, without being frightened or worried about my mother anymore. I looked at her body once again. All I could think was, isn't it fascinating how easy it is to watch someone sleep? I took the dagger and my figurine and walked ever so slowly to my brother Eric's room. For no apparent reason, I just felt the urge. I had to. I crept into his room and hid in the shadows, staring at his bed. I saw the mound in his bed that he was his helpless, sleeping body. I watched him. For what seemed to be about 2 hours, the whole time only thinking, isn't it fascinating how easy it is to watch someone sleep? It was almost 5 a.m. now, and I was still just watching him. When I had another thought flow through my head, this one was not of my own voice, but it seemed to be the voice of an old man. Got him, Nicholas. Got him. Without a second thought, clutching the blood-stained dagger in one hand and the figurine in the other, I walked over to his bed and lifted the dagger, and plunged it into the mound that was my brother. But it felt soft, unlike a body. I quickly lifted the cover to see my brother was not in bed at all. It was just a mound of covers and pillows that seemed made to look out like a person. I stared at the mound quizzically of what was going on. Then I looked at my figurine. What have you done to me? Abruptly I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around to see my brother stepping out from behind his curtains, the moonlight shining on his blood-stained face and nightshirt. I looked right and I saw the mangled, shredded corpse of our sister. I looked back at him and he obviously had been there a while, considering he couldn't get there without walking right by where I was standing in the first place. And he just stared at me, with a hatchet in his hand, and his figurine in the other, as he said, isn't it fascinating how easy it is to watch you sleep?